You know, have you all ever had a game that you got when you were younger that you could never complete? A game that no matter how many times you tried, the kid version of you just couldn't get through it? I certainly had a game like that, and mine was called Dragon: The Ancient Gates. I remember walking into a ye old GameStop on a cold winter day, and I saw this awesome looking game that a fire breathing dragon being ridden by a woman wielding a sword. No! This girl's got a dragon! I want to have a dragon! Kid me bought this game on an absolute whim, and I thoroughly played the opening first area, and then got my butt kicked. I ended up shuffling this game because I had a really hard time playing it when I was younger, and I never gave this game much of a critical look or thought. But recently I thought it'd be fun to give this game another chance and see if it holds up to this day compared to other RPGs that exist on the market, and see if there's something special about this game that has been lost to time. Dragon: The Ancient Gates is kind of an old game and not many people talk about it. So, if you want to watch to the end of the video, let me know. And if you would, please subscribe to the channel, drop a like and share the video. It all really does help me out and lets me know y'all like the content I produce. We start off learning that there's this long-lost Order of Flame, which are a group of dragons and dragon riders who brought order to the world. However, over time, the order mysteriously faded, and evil is currently trying to enslave the last traces of humanity. Our main characters are the dragon Auroch and his rider/bonded Rin. These two are the last of the Order of Flame, and thus the only ones capable of saving the world, apparently. We also learn that Rin's village has been destroyed. But if I'm being honest, there isn't very much important about this factoid, as the game mentions it once in the beginning and never again. This doesn't serve as any major character motivation, or why she's involved in the main conflict, or even why she's part of the Order of the Flame. It's quickly mentioned, everyone you know is dead, there's nothing you can do, moving on. We never get to see them, nor are we told anything about them. Their deaths don't have any weight or significance in the overall story. It feels like a needless, tragic backstory that has no point to be in the game at all. Why does Rin's village need to be destroyed? She's still brave and daring even without them not being there, or being not there in this case. So why include it? It's kind of pointless. Auroch then fucks off because apparently he can't stay and help bury the dead due to his lack of thumbs, which would have been a huge help seeing as his fucking feet are literally the size of a Komatsu PC360 LCI 11. The reason he leaves is because he needs to help some local queen summon a great mother dragon who can bring peace to the earth. Who am I? What am I doing? I hope this doesn't awaken anything in me. Now, if you look how Rin controls, she has all the basic moves you would expect any early third-person action RPG character would have. Square attacks, triangle jumps, circles for magic, and X's to crouch/roll. If you press R2, you can lock onto specific enemies and strafe around them, and L2 allows you to quickly switch between those targets. And, as a bonus, the targeting will change color as enemies lose health, which I thought was a good feature because it helps give you feedback for if your attacks are actually connecting or if your strategy is actually working. Now, I don't specifically have any complaints here, but one thing I want to complain about is the fact that combat can be very, very repetitive. When you equip a weapon, regardless of size, shape, or even weapon type, Rin will always repeat the same 3 strikes, 2 horizontals followed by 1 vertical. When weapons of a similar archetype have a similar attack pattern, that's okay. There's only so many ways to swing a club. But if a dagger and a longsword have the same attack pattern, it can be jarring and can make weapons feel as if they're the exact same, even if they appear to be very different. Outside of speed and damage, there's no other benefits to using one weapon over another outside of an extremely small number of weapons collected in the overworld, which have a unique attribute to them, or just cosmetically different. And to further add insult to injury, the weapons look almost the exact same. Almost all the weapons outside of a few are reskins of each other with different color schemes and textures. This blacksmith is stealing my hard-earned gold that I got by breaking into other people's homes and taking their possessions. In games where multiple weapons are available, it's imperative that new weapons offer new playstyles. And I never felt that combat really made me need to change weapons outside of losing the durability in one of them. Now, if you thought melee was bad, Draken does have archery and magic you can use in combat. I personally found archery to be slow and not very engaging from a gameplay standpoint, but I can see how others might enjoy being able to take enemies out from afar. Now, archery does have some unique features to it, like being able to hit, like I said, hit people from afar, break barrels from afar, and kind of stay out of combat and slowly pick off enemies in case you're low on health. But I don't like that kind of gameplay style, so I never really gave too much thought into it. Now, archery did have one unique area it could be used in that I do want to talk about later. But if I have to give it to Draken, it does have one really cool system I did like, and that was magic. As you play, Ren gets a few different spells with a few different effects. Fireball is the simplest spell that can damage enemies and explosive barrels. But, if I'm being honest, my favorite spell was something called Impale. Ren just goes Vlad the Impaler on people with this giant rotating spike, and if it didn't cost so much magic to use, I would have cast it on everyone. It does a ton of damage and can cut enemies' health in half almost immediately, and it's a quick spell to use too. But due to the high cost, I decided not to use it, and if I ever had to use magic, I opted for Fireball or Lightning Bolt. Now, something this game does that a lot of other RPGs don't do is that this game has a regenerative magic system. Your magic meter will regain energy as you run around, so if you ever are in a spot where you don't have potions to restore your magic, you can just back out of combat for a moment and regenerate your magic in a good amount of time. There's lots of different spells, so it's really easy if somebody does have one spell they like over the other. And it's the one area in the game that I do think is really good that should have been expanded upon. I'd have loved to see something where you can throw somebody with a fireball and then maybe hit them with an explosion spell and cause them to do even more damage. Or maybe you can cover somebody in ice and then throw a lightning bolt to shock them and do bonus damage. It's a little feature that this game doesn't have that would have been nice to see, especially seeing as how, like the weapons, sometimes spells can just feel like new ways to do a little bit more damage than others, and there's no added bonus effect that can be achieved, which is a shame because it would be so nice. So after I get to the main hub city, I eventually do get to meet the ultimate villains of the game, the Desert Lord. Well, Desert Lords, if you will. According to the wizard lady dressed like a 30-year-old white woman who just rolled out of Spirit Halloween after loading up her ex-husband's credit card, the Desert Lords want to rule over the world with all other races permanently under their feet. It is explained to us by the Queen that in order to stop them, we need the full force of the Mother Dragon and her army of dragons that wait to the call of war by the Order of the Flame. The Mother Dragon can only be awakened, however, when all 4 ancient gates are open, and that's the only way we're going to stop the Desert Lords and bring peace to the earth. By Arok, his ain't digging no grave ass, finally flies down so we can get this adventure started and hopefully save the world. And we finally get to do the one thing I've wanted to do in this game since forever. I get to ride a motherfucking dragon! Out of everything in the game, this is easily the best travel system, and it's easily one of the best travel systems in a lot of games recently, IMO. Very few games can give you a sense of flight control that's this good, funny enough. Ark has a really good sense of speed, and the camera can be a bit janky at times, but overall, I have a great control on how Arok moves and where he goes, and it doesn't feel slow and sluggish. I feel like I'm getting around the place quite quickly if I'm being honest. Yeah, that's right, Arok. You like being controlled by a woman with red hair, don't you? You're a sick little freak, Arok. And I completely understand how you feel. Now, Auroch isn't just used to travel across the world. There are different structures like turrets, catapults, and ballistas that can and will damage you if you hover around in one area too long. And the coolest things to fight are these wild dragons. The skies are not safe, as the Desert Lords have bred new mindless beast dragons in an attempt to stop you. Having enemies in the sky does present one flaw in the design of Auroch, and that is the lack of extensive upgrades for him. Ren gets these things like armor and weapons and spells. Auroch, though? He gets elemental breaths, and that's it. From the beginning of the game, you can't give him armor, you can't get new evasion tactics for him. The new elemental breath attacks are it, and they don't feel impactful when they're used. I tended to fall back on the standard fire breath because it's overall more reliable than the other elements. Lightning dealt decent damage but had a limited range. Ice does track enemies, but it hits like a wet noodle, and the Darkness Blast used so much energy it was completely ineffective when you're swarmed by enemies. For a game that has so many ways to change up Ren, it's a shame Auroch is left out, especially when the game wants you to fight upwards of 5 dragons and 3 ballistas at once, or just wants you to fight these dragons that are so more powerful than everybody else, and there's no way to like upgrade Auroch. He feels just as durable as he does in the beginning towards the end of the game. We got a dragon, we got a sword, and a dream. How does this world hold up? I mean, it's alright. Look, I understand that for an early PS2 game, world design wasn't always the big developmental focus. We cannot deny, however, that this world here can seem pretty empty. Most buildings are scattered far apart, and I'm not talking about cities, I'm talking the buildings itself are far apart. I mean, these cities have an almost liminal feel. I guess the forts, castles, and towns were designed this way to accommodate for Auroch's existence, so he doesn't get stuck somewhere he can't get out of. But these lands have such a liminal feel, I think I'm in the backrooms here. If we look at the different lands we travel to, there are some unique features in the landscape. Of course, mountains have snow, the valley's covered in grasses, and it has these giant tall mountains in them, and the desert has so much sand that Anakin Skywalker would cringe.
I don't like sand.
The best thing in this game, at least the best area, has to be the Desert of Tears. It is a series of floating islands that each have their own architecture. The open areas can feel rather barren of detail, but here, this actually feels pretty good. It makes sense why it's barren because it's floating islands. All that's around you are clouds. And it's a really unique area and a unique take on a desert. However, my least favorite area has to be the Valley of the Fallen. It's supposed to be a dangerous valley with several enemies of the Queen located here. But I felt the valley was ultimately pointless and just served as needless padding. You have to save some kid named Perry from the local clan of warthogs and goblins and return him to the local farm. After this, he'll give you the key to the ruins that'll allow you to enter the Desert of Tears to awaken the last gate. My question is, why not just make this whole area part of the ruins? If it's supposed to be a dangerous valley filled with monsters, why is there a random farm here? Why does this blacksmith have the worst gear in the game? And why is there a portal to the main hub city if this is supposed to be a pit stop? It's not like you can't go back to the hub city for new equipment. Hell, I had to go back to the main city several times to clear out my inventory. And speaking of quests, why am I not able to carry Perry on the back of Auroch to his farm? It's not like Auroch can't carry Perry in his arms or something. At least Perry has a sword to fight with, so when you're returning him to the farm, at least he's not completely defenseless. But I did think that his AI got stuck on way too much of the world's geometry, especially on big wide open fields. He just gets stuck on something that wasn't there. This is easily, in my opinion, nothing but padding. Like, I would have much rather have had us just travel right to the ruins and have to fight through a slog of enemies to get the key, rather than save some random kid who clearly has no point to the story. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about the dungeons? Are those any good? And you know what? Yes, they are pretty good, actually. Most are found in caves, abandoned ruins, or castles built by the Desert Lords. The standout dungeons, in my opinion, would have to be the Frost Warthog Fortress and the Flesh Mage's Lair. The Frost Warthogs are really, really cool. They're these big, gorilla, red-furred looking monster people, and they have a very imposing place. The Frost Warthog's Fortress was a really enemy dense, and it even has a part where you lose all your gear, and you need to pick up a rusty sword to fight with and fight off the guards. It's actually really cool because it makes you feel defenseless. You even get to see the Warthogs and the Desert Lords discussing your disruption to their plans, which helps make you seem more like a threat to them, and does actually make it so you feel like you're actually doing something with them. Damn, boy!
The human is more resilient than we imagine.
Sorry about that. My favorite dungeon in this entire game has to be the Flesh Mage's Lair. I mean, look at this dude! Young me would have been terrified of him. Once we get through the ruins and get to the actual floating desert, we learn that there is a final gate that's been locked away here. In order to activate this gate, we must defeat this unstoppable golem that guards it. To do that, we need to kill the Flesh Mage and take his staff, which will then deactivate the golem. Now, the cool thing about the Flesh Mage is his design. He looks creepy and messed up. And he actually has a bit of a story too. The Flesh Mage only allows his brides to enter his chambers, where he, and I quote, removes their sweet skin and wears it around his mutilated body like a cloak to become as close as possible to them. What the fuck? The reason why this dungeon is my favorite is because of the three key features here. First off, the whole dungeon is the boss fight. You're not actually able to kill the Flesh Mage. Instead, you need to destroy the pot that holds his soul. And the second thing is that this area is filled with golems that try to chase you down. In this game, golems are really, really intense to fight and have a lot of defense. They can kill you if you're not paying attention, and they're very deadly. So having to juggle this fight between finding the right pot and running away from the golems, it's really, really intense. And it's really darkly lit, and the whole time the Flesh Mage is just taunting you, telling you he's gonna get you. And lastly, this place is so uniquely designed. It has this like dark, Lovecraftian space bone carcass like design to it. The walls feel like they're covered in grime and muck. And the cool thing is that there's almost no light in here. So if you're like me and you don't bring a torch, you can kind of stumble in the dark a bit. But it makes sense because, you know, it's a dark, grim spot. This is the one time I would say a lack of lighting is beneficial to a game's design, rather than it feeling more like, oh, we forgot to put lights in the place. I will say the coolest thing about this area, at least from a gameplay area, is the bow section. There is this part where you need to shoot 4 separate orbs with a bow while dodging the golems, which is intense, as you only have a limited window from when you can actually fire arrows at the orbs. The Flesh Mage was the first time I genuinely felt a sense of danger and a sense of failing. Most of the time when I was fighting other enemies in other dungeons, I learned that you can just strafe around the enemies, and you're fast when you strafe, that it kind of prevents them from hurting you. When the enemies in the other dungeons can't hit you, it leads to this sense of, I don't actually need to try. Yet here, it doesn't matter if I'm fast. There's so many enemies and I can't stop them all. And it's really, really intense. Since our goal is to activate the last gate and stop the Desert Lords have actually tucked it away and are using a giant golem to stop it from being activated. We then use the Flesh Mage's golem powered staff thing to depower it. And once we do this, Jasad shows up and announces that he wants to kill Ren to prevent her from ruining his plans. This cutscene here, this is the last thing you see before you fight Jasad, who, by the way, is the final boss. I bring this up because I feel like there's no build-up here. He's the ultimate villain of the game, the last of the faction of the Desert Lords, the source of chaos, and he has no build-up. There's no castle, there's no gauntlet to run through, there's no slew of enemies that guard him. His boss fight is also really underwhelming. He teleports around the arena and just throws a few fireballs here and there. This is the exact same tactic as the other Desert Lords. I saved up a few potions of invulnerability to protect myself against him, because I thought there'd be like some big battle with him, and these things are rare, so I wanted to keep them. But if I'm being honest, I don't think I would have had to do this at all. He's an easy fight, and it's really disappointing. But after we beat him in this phase, Jasad decides to use a part of his soul to power the golem to crush us. We get out of there with our rock, and this starts the second phase. The golem has his death ray that deals a pretty good amount of damage, and if you do get too close, he does try to swat you out of the air. I did die a couple of times here, but eventually I did beat him. Jasad then dies as the golem falls and crushes him. And with that, the Desert Lords have no more of a leader, and they're pretty much scattered, thus allowing us to activate the last gate and awaken the Mother Dragon. And finally, we get to see her, right? See her in all her beautiful glory and watch as she brings peace to the land? Nope! The most we get is a storybook conclusion to the game, which is such a major cop-out. We heard so much about her throughout the game, and we weren't given the privilege of seeing her or her army. We just cut right to the game's credits after the storybook. It's a real big letdown because the whole time we're expecting to see the rebirth of a golden age, and we're expected to see all these dragons come out, these warriors, and they're supposed to help us stop the final big threat. And we don't get that. We are just told that, yep, the Mother Dragon was freed, everybody's happy now, everything's all good. And it's a major cop-out. It feels so bad because, yeah, the game opens on a storybook, but like, that doesn't mean the final cutscene should be one. You know? I'm a little disappointed of Draken and the Ancient Gates. Look, I don't think it's a bad game. There are some cool things that can be experienced. Ark has some good flight controls. The dungeons have a great design to them, and there were times I got completely lost in the world. But the lack of interesting build options, overly barren landscapes, and needless padding, and of course the reuse of assets from the beginning of the game to the end, make me feel as if the development team only really cared about a small handful of locations. Draken has been forgotten by the wider internet outside of a few select people who played it back in the day, and it's easy to see why. Other RPGs have done what it does to a tremendous effectiveness. If Draken could be remade, I hope they do it, because this game is interesting and it does have things that are likable about it. I think it just needs like a good repaint, you know? Maybe a touch up here and there, let me change the controls around, and remove the Valley of the Fallen. That place sucks. With that said, if you have any memories of this game, drop them below. It's always nice to hear from people and their perspective about a game, as well as learn what they think about it. It's something that I think a lot of people nowadays kind of take for granted. But, as always, if you would, subscribe to the channel again, and share this video with your friends. It really does help me out. And, like always, I'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye!